What's going on, y'all? Hopefully by now you understand what variables are, how to declare them, initialize them, and what they're for whenever we're writing code. The next important topic for us to cover is the scope of a variable. What is scope? It's nothing more than the lifetime of a variable. Think about life on Earth. You start off as a baby, you grow into adulthood, you live your best life, and eventually your time comes. Variables really work the same way. Variables are born when they're declared, and they die when their block ends. Looking at this code here, we see a variable named x is born whenever it's initialized. We see it's alive during that debug statement, and eventually somehow it dies. And we'll talk more about this here in a little bit. But when I talk about a block, I'm really referencing those open and close curly braces. Every time I refer to block, keep your eye out for those open and close curly braces. So what creates a new scope? This guy does, the curly braces. Anytime you open and close them, you're inside of a new scope. So we'll talk about three different types: class scope, method scope, and block scope, and we'll walk through the differences. Remember that variables live and die within the scope that they're declared in. Now, as developers, instead of saying a variable is alive, we say it's in scope. And instead of saying a variable is dead, we say it's out of scope. So if I declared the integer x within those curly braces and I tried to reference it outside of those curly braces, I wouldn't be allowed to, because variables can't be referenced when they're out of scope. That's when you would see those compilation errors whenever you try to save or deploy your Apex class. Now, inner blocks can see outer variables, but not the other way around. Inner blocks can access variables declared in the outer block, but outer blocks can't see variables from the inner block. That's why we can't actually reference inner once we've exited that scope. Now, that's kind of a silly example. Here's a better real-world example. Notice that we're declaring a variable called discount threshold. We have an if statement to see if the total amount is greater than the discount threshold. If it is, we try to set some status and debug that status. Everything's working fine so far. But once we leave the scope of that if statement and get down to that very first debug line that's commented out, we no longer have access to the status variable. That's because it's quote unquote dead. It's out of scope. We can't reference it. But we can still reference discount threshold. And that's because it's still within the same scope as when it was declared, which is this curly brace over here. Nested blocks can see an outer blocks variable, but not the other way around. Now, it's important to differentiate this from separate blocks. Variables don't cross between separate blocks. What that means is, even if two blocks are at the same level, like if you had two methods or two if statements, for example, they don't share variables unless one is inside of the other. So each if block in this code example has its own scope. Even though they're in the same method, the variables declared inside one can't be used inside of another. What this means is you also can't redeclare variables in the same scope. So the for loop here has its own block, but it's still within the method block. So I can't have two variables in here, one called total sales at the method level and another inside of the for loop, I should say, also called total sales. Even by reading this, how would I be able to tell which one I'm referencing? So we can't really redeclare these variables within the same scope. Instead, it's a good idea to keep those variable names unique. This will allow the code to compile, but also as a reader of the code, it makes it a lot more clear what we're trying to do and what we're trying to reference. So in this case, we kept total sales at the method level, but inside the for loop, we changed that variable name to be called order amount and to represent order amount. Now it makes it really clear that the element inside the order list is an order amount, and we want to add that to our total sales and eventually debug that once the for loop is done running. And as long as variable names are unique within the same or nested scope, we're good. Class variables have a special type of scope. It's called class scope. Variables declared in a class are accessible in all of its methods, unless they're shadowed. And shadowing could really get us into some trouble here. Shadowing happens whenever a variable declared within an inner scope has the same name as a variable declared in a class scope. The inner variable shadows the outer one, making the outer variable temporarily inaccessible within that inner scope. In this example, the inner x shadows the outer x. So any references to X within the method block refer to the inner X and not the outer one in the class block. So to avoid confusion, just like we did earlier, name things distinctly. That'll make it very clear what variables we're referencing and avoids any confusion or bugs in the long run. If you really need them named the same, we can use the keyword this to tell them apart. So in this example, we have two integers both called X. One is set on the class level and one is set on the method level. The method one is shadowing the class level X variable. So when we debug X, we get 5. That's our local variable and it's being shadowed, so it wins. We still can reference the class variable X by using the this keyword. So this.x tells Apex, hey, go reference, not the local one, but go reference that class level variable. So that can print out 100. And we'll talk more about this on another day. Okay, so let's sum this up. Open and curly braces, they define scope. The inner scope can access outer variables. Sibling or separate scopes don't share variables. You can't redeclare variables in the same scope. And shadowing means that the same name is being used between the class and other scopes. Now, there are at least a few practice problems available on the site already that you can go and get hands-on experience and put kind of this idea to test. I think the best way to do that is getting your hands on the keyboard, solving some of these challenges, and running the test to see if you did them correctly. If you found this video helpful, definitely like, subscribe, leave a comment to help me grow this channel. Appreciate y'all.